The stall warning shrieked through the cockpit like a siren from hell. "Autopilot's got it," Captain Roy Finch snapped, hands hovering over the yoke but not touching it. "Trust the system, Dana." First Officer Dana Kessler's eyes were locked on the airspeed tape, watching it stutter, freeze, then plunge toward a number that made no sense at 37,000 feet. Outside, the windows were sheeted in ice, the wingtip strobes flashing against a black wall of storm. "Roy, the airspeed's unreliable. Disconnect it. Now." Her voice didn't rise. It never did. "It's a glitch. The computer will correct." He said it like a man reciting scripture. The nose pitched up on its own. The stick shaker rattled through the frame of the Boeing 757 like the aircraft itself was afraid. Somewhere behind the cockpit door, 181 passengers had no idea their lives now depended on whether a man would listen to the woman beside him. A woman he thought was just another line first officer with a quiet voice and a habit of staying calm. He had no idea what she used to fly. He had no idea what she used to command. 20 minutes from now, Roy Finch would learn exactly why Dana Kessler didn't need to raise her voice to be obeyed, and why, in another life, in another cockpit, men who outranked him would have called her ma'am without hesitation. If you've ever trusted the wrong voice in a moment that mattered, stay with this one. It only gets more incredible from here. Subscribe now because you will want to see how this ends. Dana Kessler was 44 years old, and for the last 6 years she had flown Boeing 757s and 767s for Vantage Air out of Denver, wearing a Navy uniform with two thin stripes less than the man beside her. Nobody in the terminal, nobody in the crew lounge, nobody swiping past her at security ever looked twice. They didn't know that 14 years earlier, Lieutenant Colonel Dana Kessler had commanded a squadron of F-15E Strike Eagles out of a base in the high desert, flying 2 combat tours where she'd led 4 ship formations through surface-to-air missile envelopes that would have made most pilots' hands shake on the stick. Her call sign, back then, had been Anvil, because her old squadron used to say, nothing moved her. She'd left active duty when her mother got sick, and she'd never gone back. She traded fighter jets for airliners, traded a flight suit for a rolling suitcase, and she never once mentioned the years in between unless someone asked directly. Nobody asked. Captain Roy Finch, 51, was a good stick and a decent captain, but he carried a particular kind of pride, the pride of a man who also wore a uniform on weekends, a major in the Nebraska Air National Guard, flying cargo support out of Kestrel Air National Guard Base. He liked to remind junior officers, gently but constantly, that he understood military discipline better than any career airline pilot ever could. That morning, boarding Vantage Air Flight 1182 from Denver to Minneapolis, Roy had joked with the gate agent about babysitting the autopilot today. Dana had smiled, said nothing, and quietly checked the winter weather briefing twice. She'd flown through worse. She just hadn't told anyone that in 14 years. The pushback was routine. The taxi was routine. Denver International slid away beneath them under a gray, bruised sky, and Roy hummed along to something on the ATIS frequency like the whole flight was already decided. "Winter storm advisory for eastern Nebraska," Dana said, tapping the weather radar display. "Moderate to severe icing reported between flight levels 320 and 390. 2 aircraft ahead of us already requested altitude changes." "We'll be above it," Roy said, "climbing through 370 in a few minutes. We'll skate right over the top." Dana didn't argue. She simply reached forward and set the anti-ice systems to on, engine and wing, 30 seconds before Roy would have remembered to do it himself. He noticed. He didn't say anything. Somewhere over western Nebraska, air traffic control handed them off to Denver Center, and a new voice came on frequency, younger, tighter than the others. "Vantage 1182. Be advised, pilot reports of moderate rime icing. Rides reported as light chop through your altitude." "Copy," Roy said breezily. "We've got plenty of margin." Dana watched the outside air temperature gauge drift toward a number she didn't like. She watched thin lines of frost begin creeping across the leading edge of the wing, visible even through the scratched cockpit window, faster than the anti-ice system was clearing it. "Roy, I want to request a block altitude change. I don't like how fast that's building." He waved a hand. "It's within limits. The system's rated for this." "Relax, Dana." She didn't relax. She never did. She just watched the ice, and she watched the clock, and she started running numbers in her head that Roy hadn't thought to run at all. The first sign came as a soft chime. Not an alarm. Not yet. Just a small amber light on the airspeed indicator. Probe heat, it read. Pitot heat fault right side, Dana said, already reaching for the checklist. I want to cross-check airspeeds now. Roy glanced at his own display.
Mine res normal.
Mine's showing 8 knots slower than yours, and it's dropping. Her voice stayed level, but her hand moved to the standby instruments, confirming a third source. That's not weather noise, Roy. That's ice in the probe. The backup heater's automatic. It'll clear itself. It's not clearing. It's getting worse. Behind them, a soft knock came at the cockpit door. The lead flight attendant, a woman named Grace Liu, 29 years into a calm professional smile that was starting to crack at the edges. Captain. A few passengers noticed the wing shaking. Ice maybe? Just wanted to let you know before anyone panics back there. Turbulence, Roy told her without turning. Tell them to expect some chop. Nothing to worry about. Grace nodded and disappeared, though Dana caught the flicker of doubt in her eyes before the door shut. Dana turned back to her instruments. The airspeed on her side had dropped another 4 knots in under a minute. Physically impossible in level flight, unless the sensor itself was lying. She keyed the interphone. Center, Vantage 1182. Request lower altitude. Ice accumulation building faster than anti-ice can clear. Before Denver Center could respond, the autopilot chimed, then disconnected itself with a sound like a small dying bell. The yoke in front of Roy jerked hard to the left, all on its own. I have the aircraft, Roy said, gripping the yoke, and for one moment his voice actually shook. The 757 wallowed, nose drifting up, wings rocking gently side to side as the flight control computer fought conflicting airspeed inputs from 2 disagreeing sensors. On Dana's side, the number read 190 knots. On Roy's side, it read 260. Both could not be true. Airspeed disagree, the automated voice called out flatly, as if reading a grocery list instead of announcing a crisis. Pitch and power, Roy, Dana said. Forget the numbers. 5 degrees nose up, 78% thrust, we hold that and we're safe no matter what the tapes say. I need to know our actual speed. You don't. Not right now. Fly attitude. Roy's hands tightened on the yoke, and instead of holding steady, he pulled back. Reaching, Dana would realize later, for a number on a screen instead of trusting his own instincts, because somewhere in 14 years of flying he had learned to believe the machine over the moment. The nose came up too far. The stick shaker erupted, a violent mechanical rattle that filled the cockpit. Nose down, Dana said. Sharper now, still not shouting, never shouting. Roy, nose down right now. He hesitated just half a second, but half a second at altitude in ice is a lifetime, before he pushed forward, and the 757 shuddered through a buffet that rattled coffee cups 3 cabins back and made 181 passengers grab their armrests all at once. In the cabin, oxygen masks did not drop, but it felt to the passengers like they might. A man in seat 14C gripped his wife's hand hard enough to leave marks. A little boy near the window started crying, not from fear exactly, but because his mother's face had gone the color of chalk. Grace Liu braced herself against a galley wall, grabbed the interphone, and kept her tone soft even though her pulse hammered in her throat. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your belts fastened. We're experiencing some turbulence associated with winter weather. The flight crew has everything under control. She didn't know if that was true. She said it anyway because that was the job. Up front, Roy fought the yoke through another buffet, sweat beading at his hairline despite the cold cockpit air. Talk to me, Dana. What do you need from me? I need you to stop chasing the airspeed tape and fly the horizon, she said, reaching over and manually switching the flight display to a backup source. An angle of attack indicator most pilots barely glanced at in training. This doesn't lie. Everything else right now might. Denver Center's voice crackled back, tighter with concern now. Vantage 1182. Say altitude and intentions. Center, Vantage 1182. Unreliable airspeed indication. Requesting immediate descent and vectors clear of icing. Dana said into her headset, her voice the only calm thing on the frequency. Copy, Vantage 1182. Descend and maintain flight level 280. Fly heading 090. Advise if you require assistance. Dana glanced at Roy. We're going to need it. In the cabin, oxygen masks did not drop, but it felt to the passengers like they might. A man in seat 14C gripped his wife's hand hard enough to leave marks. A little boy near the window started crying, not from fear exactly, but because his mother's face had gone the color of chalk. Grace Lou braced herself against a galley wall, grabbed the interphone, and kept her tone soft even though her pulse hammered in her throat. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your belts fastened. We're experiencing some turbulence associated with winter weather. The flight crew has everything under control. She didn't know if that was true. She said it anyway because that was the job. Up front, Roy fought the yoke through another buffet, sweat beading at his hairline despite the cold cockpit air. Talk to me, Dana. What do you need from me? I need you to stop chasing the airspeed tape and fly the horizon, she said, reaching over and manually switching the flight display to a backup source, an angle of attack indicator most pilots barely glanced at in training. This doesn't lie. Everything else right now might. Denver Center's voice crackled back, tighter with concern now. Vantage 1182. Say altitude and intentions. Center, Vantage 1182. Unreliable airspeed indication. Requesting immediate descent and vectors clear of icing. Dana said into her headset, her voice the only calm thing on the frequency. Copy, Vantage 1182. Descend and maintain flight level 280. Fly heading 090. Advise if you require assistance. Dana glanced at Roy. We're going to need it. The cabin lights flickered once, then steadied. Somewhere in the electrical bus, ice-choked probes were feeding bad data to more than just the airspeed system now, and warning messages began stacking on the display faster than either pilot could clear them. Master caution, the automated voice intoned. Master caution. Grace Lou's voice came over the interphone, tighter now, no longer performing calm. Captain, we've got a woman in row 9 who says she's a nurse, and a man near the back who keeps asking if we're going to crash. I need something to tell them. Tell them we're managing a weather diversion, Dana said, before Roy could answer, her voice steady enough that even Grace exhaled on the other end. Tell them the flight crew is fully in control, and we will brief them the moment we know more. Roy shot her a look. Not resentment, something closer to gratitude, and beneath that, confusion. 6 years of flying beside this woman, and he had never once heard her sound like this. Not just calm, but certain, the way a person sounds when they've done something like this before and lived. Center, Vantage 1182. Dana transmitted, declaring an emergency. Engine 2 compressor stall, unreliable airspeed. Requesting priority handling and emergency equipment standing by at Sable Ridge. Vantage 1182. Roger, you are declared. Squawk 7700. Contact Sable Ridge approach on 124.65 when able. Roy finally shut down Engine 2 on Dana's call, the shutter easing as the propeller. No, the fan blades, he corrected himself, mind scattered, spun down. The aircraft flew lopsided now, heavier on one side, less power than they'd need if things got worse. We're going to need help getting this thing down, Roy said quietly. I don't think I can do this alone. You're not alone, Dana said. You never were. You just didn't know what was sitting next to you. Below them, at Kestrel Air National Guard Base, the emergency squawk had already lit up a console in the radar room. A young controller sergeant named Nora Bell watched the code 7700 blossom on her scope and picked up the phone to scramble duty alert without waiting for confirmation from her supervisor. Ops, we've got a civilian airliner squawking emergency. 40 miles northwest. Reported engine failure and instrument issues in the ice band. Recommend we launch alert fighters to assist and confirm their position visually. Comms may degrade. Within 4 minutes, 2 F-16s from the 214th Fighter Wing were rolling down the runway into the same gray ceiling that had nearly killed Vantage 1182's confidence in its own instruments. Lead pilot, call sign Rattler, was a sharp, serious captain named Mia Ordonez. 7 years in the cockpit, 2 deployments behind her. Flying today because the weather was too foul for anyone junior to handle alone. Kestrel approach, Rattler flight of 2, airborne, en route to intercept Vantage 1182. She radioed, banking hard into the murk. Back in the airliner, Dana heard the call sign crackle faintly over guard frequency and felt something tighten in her chest. Recognition, faint and strange, like hearing a song from a life she'd left behind. "Roy," she said, "when they make contact, let me talk to them." "Why?" "Because I might know how to make this faster." He didn't ask what she meant. There wasn't time. The aircraft bucked again as another ice-laden gust slammed the fuselage, and somewhere behind them, in row 9, an infant began to cry, the only person aboard, perhaps, honest enough to say out loud what everyone else was silently thinking. "Vantage 1182, this is Rattler 1, we have you on radar, 8 miles south of your position. Closing to visual join-up, how copy?" Dana's hand found the transmit switch before Roy's did. "Rattler 1, Vantage 1182, good copy. Be advised we're single-engine, unreliable airspeed on primary, flying attitude and power only. We would appreciate a visual cross-check on our configuration if you can get eyes on us." There was a pause on the frequency, half a second too long for a routine reply. "Vantage 1182, copy that request. Say again your call sign, ma'am. We don't usually get airline pilots asking for a visual AOA crosscheck like that. Just a pilot who's flown blind gauges before, Rattler. Appreciate the assist." Another pause. Then Mia Ordonez's voice again, quieter, almost private despite the open frequency. "Copy. Coming up on your 7 o'clock. Stand by for visual." Roy glanced at Dana, brow furrowed. That's a strange thing to say to a fighter pilot. Flown blind gauges before. "It's true," she said simply, eyes on the horizon. Hands steady on nothing at all because it wasn't her yoke to hold, not yet. 2 gray shapes emerged from the cloud deck off the right wing, closing fast, then slowing to match the airliner's crippled pace. Wingtips rocking gently in the recognized signal for visual join-up. Through the ice-fogged side window, Roy could just make out a helmeted head turned toward the cockpit, studying them, studying her. "Vantage 1182, Rattler 1, visual confirmed. Your right engine's shut down clean. No visible fire. Ice accumulation on your leading edges is significant, but your control surfaces look responsive. You're flying this better than most check rides I've seen." Dana almost smiled. "We'll take the compliment, Rattler. Talk us down." The relief in the cockpit lasted exactly as long as it took the weather to remind everyone it wasn't finished. A gust of crosswind slammed the aircraft sideways 40 feet in an instant, and the stick shaker growled again, low and menacing. "Airspeed's lying again," Roy said, panic edging back into his voice. "I've got 210 on my side, 170 on yours. Which one do I believe?" "Neither," Dana said. "Believe the horizon. Believe the sound of the airflow. Believe me." He looked at her, really looked, for the first time in years of routine handshakes and pre-flight briefings, and something in her face made the decision for him. He eased the yoke forward exactly as she said, and the shutter faded. "Rattler 1, Dana transmitted. We're seeing airspeed disagreement of 40 knots between primary sources. Standby instrument reads consistent with your visual observation of our attitude. Can you confirm approximate ground speed from your radar?" "Copy, Vantage 1182. Radar shows 188 knots ground speed. Matches your standby reading. Trust the standby." "Copy, trusting standby," Dana said, and beside her, Roy exhaled like a man surfacing from deep water. "How did you know to ask that?" he said quietly. "How did you know exactly what to ask a fighter pilot? Exactly how to phrase it, like you'd done this 100 times. Dana didn't answer immediately. Outside, Sable Ridge's runway lights blinked faintly through the snow, 40 miles and 18 minutes away, and somewhere on that guard frequency, Mia Ordonez was staring at her wingman with an expression that said she was starting to recognize something in the way the civilian first officer talked. A cadence, a discipline, a ghost of a call sign she hadn't heard spoken aloud in years. "Because I used to be the one flying formation, Roy. Not the one riding in back." The words hung in the cockpit for exactly 3 seconds before the radio cut back in. "Vantage 1182, Rattler 1, Mia Ordonez said, and her voice had changed, sharper, more careful. Say your name again for our logs, ma'am. Full name, if you don't mind. Dana hesitated only because she hadn't said it aloud in this context in over a decade.
Dana Kessler.
First officer, Vantage Air. A long pause. Then, from the second F-16, a younger voice broke in, unable to help himself. Rattler 1, Rattler 2. Did she say Kessler? As in, 2, stand by? Mia snapped, cutting him off, though her own hands had gone tight on the stick. Back at Kestrel Air National Guard Base, Sergeant Nora Bell, monitoring the frequency from the radar room, typed the name into the personnel cross-reference system out of pure reflexive curiosity, and stared at the screen for a full 5 seconds before picking up the phone to her supervisor. Sir, I think you need to hear this radio traffic. There's a name on the emergency frequency I don't think anyone expected to hear again. Meanwhile, in the cockpit of Vantage 1182, Roy Finch had no idea any of this was happening below him. He only knew that the woman beside him, the one who'd occupied the right seat of his cockpit for 6 quiet years, had just said something that didn't fit the woman he thought he knew, and that 2 fighter pilots on an open frequency had suddenly gone very, very careful with their words. Dana, he said slowly. Who exactly are you? She kept her eyes on the ice building along the wing strut. Right now, I'm your first officer, and we have a plane to land. Ask me again after we're on the ground. Sable Ridge Regional's tower was a squat building beside a single runway carved out of frozen wheat fields, and inside it, a controller named Tom Alvarez watched the emergency traffic crawl across his scope with the particular dread of a man who trained for this exact scenario and never once expected to use it. Vantage 1182, Sable Ridge approach. Runway 17 is clear and plowed. Winds 160 at 18 gusting 26. RVR currently 4,000 feet in blowing snow. Crash equipment standing by. Copy, Sable Ridge. Dana transmitted, then turned to Roy. Single engine, crosswind, contaminated runway, unreliable primary airspeed. This is going to be a hand-flown approach start to finish.
No autopilot, no autothrottle.
I don't know if I can do all that at once, Roy admitted, and it cost him something to say it. 6 years of pride cracking open in a single sentence. You don't have to do it alone, Dana said again, and this time she reached for the yoke on her side. Callouts are mine. Power is yours. We fly this together, the way it's supposed to work. Rattler 1 and Rattler 2 slid into loose formation on either wing, close enough that Roy could see the visor-hidden face of Mia Ordonez turn toward the cockpit window every few seconds, watching, ready to call out any deviation neither pilot inside could see through the ice-guard glass. Vantage 1182, Rattler flight, we'll stay with you through the approach. We'll call your attitude and rate of closure if your instruments disagree again, Mia radioed. Then, quieter, almost to herself but caught on the open channel. It's an honor, ma'am. Roy's head turned sharply toward Dana. She didn't look back at him. She was already running the approach checklist, voice flat and calm. The same voice she'd have used 14 years earlier lining up on a combat strip with a battle-damaged jet and no room left for error. Gear down. Dana called, and Roy's hand moved before his brain caught up. Obedient now in a way it hadn't been an hour earlier. The 757 shuddered through the gear extension. Heavier now, slower, wallowing in gusts that pushed it sideways in hard, unpredictable shoves. Snow streaked past the windscreen in horizontal lines, the runway threshold still invisible somewhere ahead in the white. 500 feet, sync rate's good, airspeed trending with power, that's a real number now, trust it, Dana said, eyes flicking between the standby gauge and the horizon. Rattler 1, your tracking center line, slight left drift, correcting. Mia's voice called from off the right wing, her F-16 pacing them at a speed so far below its comfort zone that every instinct in her body screamed to speed up, and she ignored it, because this mattered more. In the cabin, Grace Lou knelt in the aisle beside the crying infant's mother, one hand resting on the woman's shoulder, murmuring something that wasn't really words, just sound, just presence. Passengers gripped armrests. A man in row 22 silently recorded a voice memo to his wife, in case. 300 feet, Dana called. Roy, power's good. Hold that attitude. Don't chase it. I've got it, he said, And for the first time all flight, he sounded like he believed himself. The runway lights finally punched through the snow, a faint double row of amber pearls rushing up to meet them, and Dana's voice dropped lower, steadier. The voice of someone who had done exactly this, in exactly this kind of storm, with far worse odds, and walked away. 100 feet. 50. Idle power. Flare. The wheels hit hard once, then settled, and the reverse thrust on the one good engine roared to life as the aircraft shuddered down the plowed but icy runway, fighting a crosswind that tried, one last time, to shove them off centerline. They stopped 40 feet from the runway's end. In a swirl of blown snow and jet exhaust, the aircraft finally, completely still. For 3 full seconds, nobody in the cockpit spoke. Roy's hands were shaking on the yoke, not from fear anymore but from the sheer physical release of adrenaline, with nowhere left to go. Dana exhaled once, slow and quiet, and reached over to shut down the remaining engine. Overhead, Rattler 1 and Rattler 2 banked away in a slow, respectful arc, and Mia Ordonez's voice came through one final time before switching to departure frequency. Vantage 1182, safely down, emergency cruise inbound to your position. Nice flying, ma'am. Rattler flight RTB. In the cabin, the sound that broke out wasn't cheering exactly. It was something quieter, more exhausted, scattered applause mixed with sobbing and shaky laughter. 181 people realizing all at once that they were going to see whoever they'd been thinking about in those long silent minutes. Grace Lou leaned against the galley wall and allowed herself, finally, to shake. In the cockpit, Roy turned to Dana, and for a long moment he just looked at her. This woman he'd flown beside twice a week for 6 years, whose coffee order he knew, whose kids' names he could recite, and who he had just watched land a crippled airliner in a blizzard with a calm that no training manual could teach. "Dana," he said, "who are you? Really?" She unbuckled her harness slowly, watching the emergency vehicles converge with their lights strobing red and white across the snow. "I told the fighter pilots my name. That's all they needed. They called you ma'am, like they meant something by it, like you outranked them." Dana allowed herself, finally, the smallest smile. "I did. For a long time I did." The aircraft was still being marshaled to a de-icing pad when the phone rang in the Sable Ridge Tower, not the emergency line, but the direct line from Kestrel Air National Guard Base, and Tom Alvarez picked it up already knowing, somehow, that this call mattered. "Sable Ridge Tower, Alvarez. This is Colonel Whitfield, Base Commander at Kestrel. I need you to confirm something for me. The airline first officer on that emergency landing. Did she give her name as Dana Kessler?" "That's what came across the frequency, sir." "Why?" There was a pause on the line, long enough that Alvarez wondered if the call had dropped. "Because if that's the same Dana Kessler I think it is, that woman commanded a Strike Eagle squadron in combat before half my current pilots finished flight school. She's the reason 3 of my senior instructors are alive today. I need someone to get me in a room with her before that aircraft leaves my airspace." Inside the airliner, still parked and ticking with cooling metal, Roy Finch sat frozen in his seat, replaying 6 years of small moments. The time she'd anticipated a weather call before he did, the time she'd known exactly which checklist item mattered most under pressure, the calm that he'd mistaken all this time for simple temperament instead of what it actually was, muscle memory built in places far more dangerous than a commercial cockpit. "You commanded a squadron," he said slowly. "In combat. 2 tours. Dana said, gathering her flight bag, hands finally, quietly trembling now that the adrenaline had nowhere left to go.
Lieutenant-colonel.
Call sign Enville. I flew Strike Eagles until my mother got sick and I came home to take care of her, and I never went back. And in all these years, you never said anything. You never asked what I did before this, Roy. Most people don't." By the time the ground crew rolled the air stairs to the aircraft door, a staff car with Nebraska Air National Guard markings was already waiting on the ramp, snow swirling around its headlights, and a man in a heavy service coat stood beside it, hands clasped behind his back like he was standing at attention out of habit rather than ceremony. Colonel Marcus Whitfield was 61, silver-haired, a man who had flown fighters himself once, long enough ago that his knees no longer let him, and he watched the airliner's door open with an expression Roy had never seen turned toward a commercial first officer before. Not curiosity, not sympathy. Reverence. Dana stepped out onto the air stairs first, flight bag over one shoulder, and stopped for a moment at the sight of him. "Colonel Whitfield," she said quietly. "Lieutenant Colonel Kessler," he replied, and though she'd been out of uniform for 6 years, he said her old rank like it had never left her. "I heard your voice on the guard frequency before I heard your name, and I still didn't believe it until Ordóñez confirmed it landing. It's been a long time, Enville." Behind her, Roy stood in the cockpit doorway, watching a full-bird colonel address his first officer with something close to deference, and felt the last piece of his understanding of the last 6 years quietly rearrange itself. "You flew with him?" Dana said, nodding toward the tarmac where Mia Ordóñez's F-16 was already shut down and cooling, the pilot herself walking toward them across the snow, helmet under one arm. "Trained half my squadron on stories about your last deployment," Whitfield said. "Didn't think I'd ever get to shake the hand that flew it." Mia Ordóñez arrived, breathless from the cold, and did something that made every ground crew member on the ramp turn and stare. She came to attention and saluted a woman in a commercial airline uniform, right there on the open tarmac. "Ma'am," Mia said, holding the salute a beat longer than protocol required. "I read your after-action report in flight school. The strike near the ridgeline, the one where you brought your flight home on one engine after taking SAM fire. We used to study it." Dana returned the salute out of a reflex 14 years old, and something in her posture straightened without her meaning it to, the ghost of a rank reasserting itself in her spine. "That was a long time ago, Captain." "Not long enough that it stopped mattering," Mia said. Roy stood a few feet away, still in his captain's uniform, still holding his own flight bag, feeling smaller in that moment than he had in 20 years of flying. Not because anyone had said a word against him, but because he was finally seeing, in full daylight, exactly who had been quietly correcting his mistakes for 6 years without ever once making him feel small for it. "I owe you an apology," he said to Dana, once Whitfield and Ordóñez had stepped aside to arrange transport. "Back there. I trusted the autopilot over your call. I should have listened the second you said something was wrong." "You listened eventually," Dana said. "That's what matters. You outrank me, not just in years of flying, in everything, and I never knew. Rank doesn't fly the airplane, Roy. Trust does. You just needed a reason to give it." She looked past him at the aircraft, its skin still glazed with ice, its one engine silent and cold. "You gave it to me 20 minutes too late. Next time, give it sooner." He nodded, throat tight, and for the first time all day, didn't have a confident answer ready. Inside the terminal, word had already begun to spread. A flight attendant's phone call to her sister, a passenger's social media post from the gate, the kind of thing that moves through a small regional airport faster than any official statement. By the time Dana and Roy walked into the small terminal building, a cluster of passengers from Flight 1182 had gathered near the vending machines, and when Dana passed, a ripple of quiet recognition followed her. Not because anyone recognized her face, but because word had already reached them of what the fighter pilots outside had called her. An older man in a University of Nebraska cap stood up as she passed. "You're the one who talked the jets down to us. My grandson said you used to fly those things yourself." "A long time ago," Dana said again, the same 3 words she'd used like a shield for the next several hours. Grace Lou found her near the gate agent's counter, eyes still red-rimmed from adrenaline and relief. "I've flown with a lot of captains and first officers in 9 years, and I've never once been more grateful for someone's silence in a cockpit as I have been for yours today. You could have said something. Anything. You didn't need to." "It wasn't the moment for it," Dana said. "The moment was getting everyone down safely." "Well," Grace said, "the moment's over now, and everyone wants to know who you are." Dana looked out through the terminal windows at the snow still falling steadily over the ramp, at the aircraft being towed toward the de-icing pad, its damaged engine cowling visible even from this distance, and thought, not for the first time, that the hardest part of coming home from a war was learning how small you were supposed to make yourself afterward. "I'm just the first officer who happened to remember her training," she said. "That's all anyone needs to know." But Colonel Whitfield had other plans. Within the hour, he'd arranged a private room at the small regional airport's administrative office, and it was there, over surprisingly good coffee from a machine that had clearly seen better decades, that the real conversation happened. "I want you to consider something," Whitfield said, sliding a folder across the table. "Not orders, just information. A standing offer that had existed, unspoken, for years. We've had 3 qualified instructor pilot positions open at Kestrel for 8 months. We can't recruit fast enough, and half our junior pilots are flying with less real crisis experience than you demonstrated in 20 minutes today." Dana turned the folder over without opening it. "I have a job." "You have a job flying passengers from one gate to another, which matters, and which you're clearly excellent at," Whitfield said. "But you also have 20 years of combat and command experience currently being used exclusively to make Captain Finch's coffee runs smoother." Roy, standing near the door, didn't argue the point. "I'm not looking to go back," Dana said quietly. "I left for a reason." "Your mother," Whitfield said gently. It wasn't a question. Some records apparently hadn't been forgotten. "She passed 2 years ago," Dana said. "I just never found a reason to go looking for a new one." Whitfield didn't push further. He simply left the folder on the table and stood, buttoning his coat against the cold outside. "The offer doesn't expire, Colonel. Neither does the respect of every pilot who heard your voice on that frequency today. Think about it." He left, and Dana sat alone for a long moment with the folder unopened in front of her, the storm outside finally beginning to ease, the first real patch of clear sky in hours breaking through above the runway. Roy found her there 20 minutes later, 2 cups of vending machine coffee in hand, and sat down across from her without asking permission. "You're actually thinking about it," he said. "Not a question." "I don't know," Dana admitted. "I built a life around not thinking about it. It was easier." "Easier for who?" Roy asked, and there was something almost gentle in the challenge. "You flew that airplane down like it was nothing today, like you'd done it 100 times in far worse conditions. I watched you save 181 people including me, and the whole time you looked like you were just waiting to be allowed to be who you actually are." Dana studied him for a long moment. 6 years of small assumptions between them were unraveling fast, and neither of them quite knew what to do with the space left behind. "I spent 14 years being the most capable person in dangerous rooms," she said finally. "And then I spent 6 years being invisible on purpose because invisible was safe, and safe was what I needed after watching too many people I loved not come home. Being ordinary felt like a kindness I was giving myself." "It wasn't ordinary," Roy said. "It was just quiet. There's a difference." Dana almost laughed, the first real laugh of the day. "That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me, Roy. I've got 20 years of not saying nice things to make up for," he said. "Starting with this thank you, for not letting my pride kill us both today." She looked down at Whitfield's folder, still closed on the table between them, and for the first time all day, allowed herself to actually consider it. Not as an obligation, not as a debt owed to an old identity, but as a door that had simply been standing open the whole time, waiting for her to notice it again. The airline, for its part, moved fast once the story reached corporate. First a phone call from Vantage Air's chief pilot, praising the crew's handling of the emergency, then, quieter, a private conversation about what exactly had happened in that cockpit, and who exactly had been sitting in the right seat all this time. "We'd like to feature your handling of this in our safety bulletin," the chief pilot told Dana over the phone that evening, from a hotel room in Sable Ridge where the crew had been put up for the night. "With your permission, of course. It's the kind of thing that could genuinely change how we train unreliable airspeed scenarios." "I'd rather it be about the procedure than about me," Dana said. "Understood. Though I imagine words already traveling regardless." A pause. "Off the record, is it true what I'm hearing? Lieutenant Colonel, Strike Eagles, Combat Command. It's true. Then, off the record again. Thank you for choosing to fly for us instead of just anyone." That night, Roy called his wife from his own hotel room and found himself, for the first time in years, describing a colleague not by her competence but by her character. The calm, the discipline, the quiet years of correcting his mistakes without once making him feel corrected. "I almost got us all killed today," he told her, "because I trusted a machine over a person who'd earned the right to be trusted completely." "But you didn't," his wife said. You listened. Eventually. 20 minutes too late. 20 minutes early enough, she corrected gently. There's a difference between the two, Roy. Don't lose that distinction. Down the hall, Dana sat by her hotel window, watching the last of the storm clear over the flat Nebraska horizon. Whitfield's folder open on the desk beside her for the first time. The fine print of a life she'd once walked away from, waiting patiently for her decision. The following morning, before Flight 1182's replacement crew took over the continuing service to Minneapolis, Dana walked out to the ramp one last time to see the damaged aircraft. Its right engine cowling open, mechanics already swarming the compressor section. Ice long since melted from wings that had carried 181 strangers through a storm that should have broken them. Mia Ordonez was there too, in civilian clothes now, off-duty but unable to stay away. I keep thinking about what you said on the radio, she told Dana. About flying formation instead of riding in back. I've flown 4 years thinking that was the whole world. Combat, formation, the edge of things. It never occurred to me the same discipline could just sit quietly in an airliner cockpit for 6 years, waiting to matter again. It always matters, Dana said. It just doesn't always get to prove it. Are you taking the instructor position? Dana looked at the aircraft, then at the sky, clear now, pale blue and enormous over the flat white fields. I don't know yet, but I'm not saying no anymore. That's new, for me. Inside the terminal, Grace Liu was helping reroute the last of the shaken passengers onto their connecting flights, and stopped Dana on her way through. The woman in row 9, the nurse, asked me to give you this. She handed over a folded napkin with a phone number and 3 words. Thank you, Colonel. She must have overheard the radio, Dana said, tucking it away. Half the plane did, Grace said. Nobody's forgetting this flight anytime soon, least of all Roy. Across the terminal, Roy stood near the gate, watching her. And for the first time in 6 years, he didn't look at her like a colleague he'd never quite figured out. He looked at her like someone he finally, fully understood and respected without reservation for exactly who she was. 3 weeks later, back in Denver, Dana Kessler sat in the crew lounge before another routine flight, in her Navy Vantage Air uniform with its 2 thin stripes, and found Roy waiting for her with 2 coffees instead of 1, the way he'd started doing since Nebraska. I put in for a transfer, he said, sliding 1 cup across the table. Not away from you. To your crew permanently if scheduling allows it. I figured if I'm going to keep flying, I'd rather learn from someone who's already proven what she's made of. You don't need to prove anything to me, Roy. I know. That's exactly why I want to keep flying with you. He hesitated. Did you decide? About Kestrel? Dana pulled a folded letter from her flight bag, her acceptance, signed 2 days earlier, effective the following training cycle. Part-time instructor pilot, Nebraska Air National Guard, teaching unreliable airspeed and emergency procedures to a new generation of fighter pilots who would never know how close she'd come to disappearing into ordinary life entirely. I start next month, she said. Weekends and leave days alongside this job. Whitfield's idea. Said the Guard could use someone who'd actually lived through the scenarios instead of just simulating them. So you get to be both now, Roy said. Anvil and Dana. I think I always was, she said. I just needed a reason to stop hiding one from the other. Outside the lounge window, another storm system was rolling in from the west, gray and heavy over the Rockies, and Dana watched it without the old flicker of dread she used to feel before difficult weather, because somewhere in the last 3 weeks, she'd remembered something she'd let herself forget. She had never actually needed permission to be exactly who she was. The flight that evening was uneventful. Clear skies, smooth air, a routine hop to Chicago with nothing more dramatic than a minor delay at the gate. Dana ran her pre-flight checks the same way she always had, quietly, thoroughly, without fanfare, and Roy, in the left seat beside her, found himself double-checking his own numbers against hers out of habit now, not doubt. Somewhere over eastern Colorado, as the sun dropped low and gold across the wingtip, Roy glanced over at her. Do you miss it? The jets, the formation, all of it. Sometimes, Dana admitted, but I don't miss who I had to be to survive it. I think I finally found a way to keep both the quiet and the readiness. I didn't think that was possible for a long time. For what it's worth, Roy said. I'm glad you were sitting next to me that day, and every day since. She didn't answer with words. She simply nodded once, the way she always did, and turned back to the instruments, calm as ever, competent as ever, exactly as she had been the whole time. Not hidden, not diminished, just patiently waiting for the world to notice what had been sitting quietly in the right seat all along. If there's someone in your life whose calm you've mistaken for ordinary, this is your reminder to look closer, because the steadiest voice in the room is often the one that's earned the right to be trusted completely. Some of the strongest people you'll ever meet won't announce it. They'll simply be there, ready the moment it matters most. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments which moment hit hardest, and stay close for the next one. There are more quiet legends out there, still waiting for their turn to be seen.